Hello everyone, welcome to this new video. This time we're going to talk about a truly sinister and enigmatic specter that's part of the Conjuring universe. The Ferryman, an entity who, despite having only a brief appearance in the 2019 film Annabelle Comes Home, has quickly become one of the fans' favorite characters. His terrifying aesthetic, inspired by the Greek legend of Charon, and his role as a being who collects the souls of those who don't pay his toll, have cemented him as one of the most memorable spirits Ed and Lorraine Warren have ever faced. In this video, I'll be explaining in detail the story of the Ferryman within the Conjuring universe, up to this point, his possible origins in mythology and ancient legends, his physical appearance, personality and behavior, his terrifying supernatural powers, and what could be his potential weaknesses. I'll also explore the connections between the spirit and the Annabelle doll, as well as the dynamic that links him to the other entities that appear in Annabelle Comes Home. As I mentioned earlier, the Ferryman is a malevolent entity introduced in the third Annabelle film, released in 2019. While he's not the main villain, since the story revolves around the doll Annabelle and the demon Malthus, the Ferryman plays a notable role as one of the secondary spirits that are unleashed when Annabelle's glass case is accidentally opened. Mary Ellen, Judy Warren's babysitter, and her friend Daniela find themselves trapped in a night of terror after Daniela, driven by curiosity, sneaks into the Warrens' Museum of Cursed Artifacts. There, Daniela touches various objects in a desperate attempt to contact her deceased father and, unknowingly, releases the influence of the doll. Now free from her glass prison, Annabelle awakens other spirits, including the Ferryman, who begins to stalk and torment Mary Ellen and Daniela, showing them eerie glimpses and ghostly manifestations of his past victims. It's suggested that this entity feeds on the souls of his prey and collects them as payment. And throughout the movie, we discover that he places coins over the eyes of those he attacks. The story, though brief, hints that the Ferryman has a much deeper and deadlier background than what initially appears. This spirit is not just a random ghost that Mary Ellen and Daniela encounter by chance. Ed and Lorraine Warren, within the fictional framework of the saga, had already gathered testimonies and evidence from multiple victims who all shared a very specific pattern. In the police reports, the bodies were found with no eyes and with two ancient coins placed in their sockets. Sometimes the coins came from different origins, suggesting that the entity had manifested in various countries. According to the files shown in the movie, there was a young woman who began dreaming of a hunched figure demanding a payment so it wouldn't take her away. At first, she dismissed the dreams, but shortly after, she began to hear the sound of coins dropping in the hallways of her home. Eventually, her parents found her dead, her eyes missing, and ancient coins placed in the empty sockets. When Ed and Lorraine Warren investigated the case, they concluded that they were dealing with something far more sinister than it initially seemed. From the very beginning, they suspected it was a demon with a very specific purpose: to act as a collector of souls, claiming payment from those who hadn't settled their debt with death. After a few encounters with the entity, the Warrens managed to retrieve a pair of coins linked to one of the murders. It's believed that these coins were tainted with the Ferryman's malevolent energy and could function as a kind of gateway or link that allowed the spirit to manifest in the world of the living. Once in the Warrens' possession, the coins were blessed and secured in a special compartment within their artifact room. There, the entity was supposedly forced into dormancy, unable to possess or attract more victims. However, the terror resurfaces when Daniela Rios, overwhelmed with guilt over her father's death, decides to snoop around the Warrens' cursed object collection. Her original intention was to contact her father's spirit, hoping to apologize or at least find some comfort. In her desperation, she ends up touching and moving several dark artifacts, including the Ferryman's coins. To make matters worse, she also opens Annabelle's glass case. This doll, along with the demon Malthus, acts like a beacon or a magnet, awakening other spirits linked to the cursed artifacts in the house. Taking advantage of the chaos, the Ferryman grows stronger and begins to haunt the home. He starts by cutting the lights, stalks Mary Ellen, and lets coins fall to the ground, their echo reverberating eerily through the darkest corners. One of the most chilling sequences happens when Mary Ellen, after hearing a tape recorder playing interviews with past victims, turns around to see several specters behind her. each with coins over their eyes. These are the bodies claimed by the Ferryman. The entity then materializes from the shadows. But just when he's about to seize her, Mary Ellen manages to shine her flashlight directly at him, causing him to vanish momentarily, as if the light has the power to weaken him. It's quite evident, both by his name and the use of coins placed over the eyes, that this entity is based on Charon, the ferryman from Greek and Roman mythology. According to classical legend, Charon was responsible for transporting the souls of the deceased across the river Styx, or in some versions, the Acheron. In exchange, he demanded a coin, often an obol, which was placed either in the mouth of the deceased or over their eyes to pay for their journey to the underworld. However, there's a notable contrast. In Greek mythology, Charon is not inherently evil. He is simply a worker fulfilling his duty. In the Conjuring universe, however, the Ferryman is overtly malevolent, a specter who delights in tormenting the living. Rather than neutrally ferrying souls from one realm to another, he seeks to possess them, violently stealing their eyes and leaving coins behind as macabre trophies. James Wan and Gary Dauberman were inspired by the imagery and iconography of Charon, but they twisted it into something far darker and more sadistic for the franchise. That said, the concept of a soul-faring figure isn't exclusive to Greek mythology. In ancient Egypt, it was believed the dead had to cross a river to reach the afterlife. Among the Celts, tradition spoke of crossing lakes or ethereal bridges. Even in pre-Columbian America, there were myths about psychopomp spirits who guided the souls of the departed. Most likely, the creators of the Ferryman character drew on these universal themes of coin-bearing guys between life and death, transforming them into a modern horror figure. One of the most striking features of this entity in the film is his appearance. Although we don't see him clearly very often, each of his appearances is carefully crafted to leave a lasting impression on the viewer. First, there are his tattered dark garments. He wears a long cloak, something like a torn robe or mantle, very reminiscent of a medieval monk. Second, his face is shrouded in deep shadow. Light barely reflects off it, as if he exists in a permanent state of twilight. He also has coins in place of eyes, his most iconic feature. Additionally, his hands stand out for their eerie look, pale, bony, and with unnaturally long fingers, reinforcing the impression that he's a walking corpse. Lastly, in some promotional images and concept art, he's shown carrying a kind of staff or oar, a direct nod to the mythological figure of Charon. From an artistic standpoint, the effort of the costume and makeup team to give the Ferryman a unique and distinctive look is clearly evident. Thanks to this, he is never confused with other entities in the Conjuring universe, such as Valak, Malthus, or the Crooked Man. In fact, each of these spirits has their own visual identity and a very particular way of moving. In terms of behavior, we're dealing with an entity that demands tolls and thrives on fear. Unlike the mythological version of Charon, the Conjuring's Ferryman seems to take pleasure in causing suffering. Even though he demands coins in exchange for not taking someone's soul, it's implied that he ends up stealing them anyway. The trail of corpses he leaves behind, eyeless and with ancient coins in their sockets, is clear proof of his cruelty. This entity typically begins its attack by appearing in the victim's dreams or visions, demanding a toll in exchange for sparing their soul. Then it triggers paranormal phenomena, such as the sound of coins dropping, shadowy figures at the end of hallways, or eerie voices on tape recorders repeating chilling tales about him. Finally, he appears physically when the victim is isolated, vulnerable, or overcome with fear. At that moment, he uses his powers to manipulate space and light, enveloping his prey in the illusion of catacombs or coffins. It is then that he can drag them into his realm, or kill them, leaving the body behind with coins where their eyes once were. As is the case with many of the cursed spirits in the Warrens Museum, the Ferryman doesn't actively interact with the other entities in a struggle for the victim's soul. Instead, it appears that each spirit is awakened by Annabelle and acts independently, though with a shared goal to terrorize and claim a victim. Nevertheless, in the film, we see how Malthus, through the doll, creates the ideal conditions for all the entities to manifest, feeding off the surrounding chaos and enhancing one another's powers. As a malevolent force, the Ferryman possesses several supernatural abilities that make him one of the most formidable entities in the Conjuring universe. First of all, one of the Ferryman's most notable abilities is teleportation, or sudden manifestation. as he can appear in any dark corner, emerge behind his victim, or materialize out of nowhere without warning. Additionally, he possesses the power of invisibility or camouflage. He is rarely seen clearly. In most of his appearances, he only reveals his silhouette or part of his face, which heightens the tension and mystery surrounding him. He is also known to manipulate objects. He makes coins roll, slams doors shut, activates recorders, and causes electrical malfunctions or blackouts. Another standout ability is his power to alter perception. He can create terrifying illusions such as endless catacombs, hallways filled with coffins, or ordinary rooms transformed into hellish spaces. Furthermore, the Ferryman can drag people into his own realm, a space closely tied to death and eternal darkness. Through these abilities, the entity feeds on the fear of his victims, psychologically weakening them until they are completely defenseless. Taken together, these powers give him an aura of invulnerability. Much like Valak, conventional physical attacks seem to have no effect. He cannot be harmed or stopped by ordinary weapons. In the film, one of the few moments in which Mary Ellen temporarily escapes the Ferryman is when she shines a flashlight directly at him. The entity is forced to retreat or vanish, suggesting that intense direct light may weaken or disorient him. However, the movie doesn't clarify whether this is a true vulnerability or just a temporary reaction, leaving open the possibility that light is his only known weakness so far. As is often the case in the Conjuring saga, sealing away the cursed object or the source of the entity, in this case the coins and Annabelle's influence, proves to be the key to containing it. Once Annabelle is locked back in her glass case, the malevolent emissions from the demon mouths cease, and with them, the spirits associated with the doll, including the Ferryman, stop manifesting. That said, fans have put forth several theories suggesting that sacred objects, prayers, or Catholic rituals might be effective against him. However, this isn't shown on screen. There's no scene in which he is confronted with a crucifix or holy water. What we do know is that the Warrens Museum is filled with spiritual protections that, collectively, help keep each entity at bay. It's interesting to note that DC Comics, through its DC Horror label, published several stories related to the Conjuring universe. One of them tells the tale of a man who, as a child, dared to steal a coin from a deceased person's coffin, the very coin meant for the Ferryman. This single act caused all of his loved ones to die tragically throughout his life, as the Ferryman never forgave his offense. When the man finally manages to track down the coin in hopes of returning it and redeeming himself, he discovers it was melted down. The story ends with the Ferryman appearing and taking him, as he never received his payment. This comic expands on the idea that just one transgression is enough to suffer the relentless persecution of this spirit. In the film, we see a similar concept. Anyone who comes into contact with the coins or steals them becomes a target of the Ferryman's wrath. James Wan, producer and creator of the Conjurverse, and Gary Dauberman, screenwriter and director of Annabelle Comes Home, mentioned in interviews that they wanted to introduce new spirits that could one day expand the saga. They found the Ferryman particularly intriguing because, according to Wan, when he was a teenager, he once saw photos of deceased people with coins over their eyes, and it deeply disturbed him. That haunting visual stayed with him, and he knew he would eventually use it in a horror film. With this in mind, the concept design team explored several possibilities for the Ferryman's appearance. In some early drafts, he looked more skeletal. In others, they drew directly from the Grim Reaper archetype. Ultimately, they chose to blend imagery of Charon with a 19th century aesthetic, dressing the entity in tattered, dirty clothes, and adorning his chest, wrists, and face with old coins. Actor Alexander Ward portrayed the character, moving slowly and almost unnaturally to give the impression of a being that doesn't walk like a human. The result was one of the most memorable secondary specters in the film. Despite how intriguing he is, the Ferryman does not reappear in The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It, or in any other released spin-offs. Many fans speculate that in a future sequel or prequel, the entity's story could be explored in greater depth, potentially giving him a main role like the nun received after her brief appearance in The Conjuring 2. There has even been talk of a potential film titled The Ferryman, or at the very least, a more substantial cameo if a new project revisits the Warrens Museum storyline. In fact, James Wan once mentioned in an interview his interest in creating standalone films for each of the franchise's notable spirits, like the Crooked Man, but those plans haven't always materialized. So far, there is no official confirmation of a Ferryman spin-off. In the end, what we know for sure is that the franchise leaves the door open for new stories and encounters. The Ferryman remains locked away in the Warrens Museum, dormant, waiting for someone else to make the mistake of entering and meddling with his cursed coins. That wraps up this video about the Ferryman from the Conjuring universe. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to leave a like, share it on your social media to support the channel, and subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming content I've prepared about the Conjuring universe. Until next time, and remember, if you ever hear coins dropping in a dark room, it might be best not to investigate. It could be the Ferryman coming to collect his toll. See you in the next video. Hey, don't go just yet. If you enjoyed my video, I'd love to recommend another one for you to watch.